Okay, this is good. Hi, Xiomara. Oh, I'm running out of booklets, so just sit. I didn't expect such a crowd. Oh, you got good, good. So, so nice to, and yeah, and more. Okay. Sorry, I'm running out of booklets, so we'll see if they can print some more. Welcome, welcome. It seems so long a month, I don't know, but I'm so used to see people almost every week. So today we're going to look at that, I think, fascinating program of the painting school of Cuzco. I went to Cuzco 50 years ago. It seems it seems like yesterday and a very long way, but it left an incredible memory for me. I really love it, and I love the whole culture over there. So I was really excited when I decided to give this talk. And so let's see if I can. Hopefully these two work, and that would be fabulous. No, that's it. And never the first one. Okay, so here is a map just to remind you on how Pisarro came to conquer Peru, which was an amazing deed. If you think about it, there's a lot of luck included in that, but a lot of perseverance. Just very much like you see with Christopher Columbus and the followers that are going to be able to conquer some cultures that were very powerful at the time. So the first try was done not by Pisarro, but by Vasco Núñez de Balboa, came to Central America and tried to go through that narrow pass there, in more or less what is Panama now, and didn't quite make it. I mean, he went across and then went back. He thought he had found nothing, and so this is the way he did. But in 1531, Pisarro succeeded, and with his a small army, not really a large number of people, he went down the whole western coast of South America, all the way to the town of Cajamarca in northern Peru, where he is going to encounter some of the Incas that by that time had created that empire about 150 years prior to that time. The luck for him was that he found an empire that was split in two, because there was a fight between two half-brothers, Huáscar and Atahualpa, who were of the same father, who had just died, but of different mothers. And Huáscar considered that he was the only legitimate son, because he had been named by his father as a successor, and that he was also from a mother who was a descendant of the sun. And that was very important for the Inca, what they call the super Inca, is that he had to be a descendant of the sun, and his wife had also to be a descendant of the sun, so that the heir would be legitimate. Now, Huáscar had a few wives, and he met one in Quito, Ecuador, and had a child with her, who was Atahualpa. And apparently Atahualpa claims that when his father, Huayna, died, that he had named him as a successor. So there was a big fight between the two, and they kind of split the empire between the Northern Empire with capital as Quito and the Southern Empire with Cuzco as a capital. But Atahualpa vanquished Huáscar, but very quickly was tricked by the Spaniard in Cajamarca to come and meet Pisarro. And once he arrived, Pisarro arrested him with his retinue and imprisoned him and gave him, asked for a ransom of a whole room to be filled with gold. Sorry, but the usual call of my mom. Mamie, je donne un cours aujourd'hui. Maman, je donne cours. Excuse-moi. I told her yesterday, but anyway. So Atahualpa was imprisoned for a while. During the time he had dispatched people around his empire to collect gold to fulfill the ransom. But once the room was filled up with gold, Pisarro realized that releasing Atahualpa would be very dangerous. And so they decided to get rid of him. And to do that, they accused him of all kinds of things, which was idolatry, heresy, and other things. And so they dragged him to the center square in Cajamarca and were ready to burn him alive. And he begged not to do it because, as they believed in afterlife, his body had to be intact. And so he begged and begged until they decided, okay, they were going to just use the garrote, and they strangled him instead. And so his body could be saved. Anyway, from that time on, the Spaniards just sent, and because they were so impressive to the Incas who didn't know horses, they arrived with horses, which made them much taller, but these animals were totally unknown to the Incas. And so that plus the guns, they didn't know powder. So having these guns that were so deadly made them incredible figures that were equal almost to gods. And so they very quickly were able to submit the Incas. And we'll see that they followed and that road, and they know that Cuzco is the capital, and they know, seeing that they were able to collect so much gold, they know there is gold in Cuzco, and it's pure greed to decide to go all the way down to Cuzco, which is in the Andes. And see if I can find it in the map here. So they go all the way. Imagine the trek to go there with horses on a country they don't know, having very quickly gathered a few Indians that were scouts for them, if you want, managed to start translating things and made their way all the way to Cuzco. And so Cuzco will be the center of our talk today. Just to refresh your memory, I think it's really interesting to see a timeline. And this one is a comparison timeline, which I really like, because you have on the left what's happening in Latin America, and on the right what is happening in the rest of the world, let's say, namely Europe, because that's what at that time they considered the world. So you see the construction of Tenochtitlan in Mexico in 1325 with the first voyage in 1492 of Christopher Columbus. Moving down to 1533, Francisco Pizarro enters Peru. At that time, we have just a little, during that time, we are at the reign of Charles V as Holy Roman Emperor at that time. In 35, the Viceroyalty of New Spain is established. Printing press pretty quickly afterwards, so they're very practical in the way they invade. Promulgation of new laws, which are a set of laws that try to protect the indigenous people of Americas because they were abused. And so they tried to give them some protection, though it wasn't very successful. The Viceroyalty of Peru is established in 1544, and they decide to make the new capital, Lima. Lima comes almost out of nothing. Lima was not much. It was a little harbor with some tribes living there, but they decide they need a harbor because they come with the ships and they have to load the ships to go back to Spain. So they cannot use Cuzco, which is inland and is difficult, has a difficult access. So Lima de los Reyes becomes the capital of Peru. Then already in 1551, we find royal universities that are founded in New Spain and in Peru. At that time, as we can look on the other side, we have the reign of Queen Elizabeth. And then going on, the Treaty of Madrid, 1750, that is a very important treaty that is going to split really the East and the West for Portugal and for Spain. Very quickly, the 1759, the Jesuits who had been so successful in helping the conversion of the indigenous population are expelled from the Portuguese Empire first, and then in 1767 expelled from Spanish America. And this is a whole dispute. In fact, it's a power struggle between papacy and the Jesuits who were so powerful. In 1780 and 81, we have the revolt of Tupac Amaru, who is the last Inca, not in name. He doesn't have the rank, but he becomes very powerful among the indigenous population and tries to revolt against Spain. And then you start seeing a whole series of revolutions. In Colombia, Haiti struggles for its independence. And then in the early 19th century, we see a revolution everywhere in all these Latin American countries. So just to give you a little idea. Now, definitely the Spaniards would have not been able to conquer Mexico and Central America and South America without the help of the religious orders. Because as you have the double meaning of orders, they brought order to the country, which the soldiers were not doing. By transferring the beliefs from their previous beliefs to Christianity, they were able to mobilize the population. And we'll see how in South America, because of some of the similarity that exists between Christianity and the Inca religion, it looks like a soft, very easy transfer. It's just like you looking at, you believe in certain God, and then suddenly they tell you, yeah, God's name is not exactly the same, but he does the same thing. And so you say, okay, so they remove all the images of the former God, put the new one instead, and they can pray to him and try to get rain to fall or do other things. And it works. So the Franciscans are going to be, and the Dominicans and all these are going to be incredibly instrumental in settling the country, in being able to convince the population to work hand in hand with them. So I just gave you a list of the various religious orders, the most important being the Franciscans, who accompanied Pisarro during this conquest of Peru. They were there. They are the ones who are going to blame Atahualpa for idolatry and so on, and going to have the cross next to him when he dies, So they're going to be very, very instrumental. Dominicans also, just a little later, Mercedarian also come a little later, all having their specialty, and often their locations are different. You find that the Jesuits, for example, are going to move further down the countryside than many of the others, and are going to do these reducciones. So we have Mercedarian, Augustinian a little later, and the Jesuits come in 68 in Peru, but are going to be very, very active in that whole, not only in Brazil, Bolivia, Peru, and of course, up north in Mexico too. And they are the teachers, as they still are nowadays. The Jesuits are the teachers. And they have colleges so that they can teach people to become priests and go and preach all around. So let's look at Cuzco. Cuzco, capital of the Inca Empire between the 13th century, not Inca, Inca Empire in 1532. According to the Inca legend, the city was rebuilt by Sapa Inca Pachacuti from a little sleepy city-state to what becomes the vast empire of Tahuantinsuyo, which runs literally from Quito, so from Ecuador, all the way down to Chile. And when you think about that, the miles between these two, it's unbelievable. They built a road that some still exist, small roads. Don't forget, they had no car, they didn't know the wheel. They had no animal to pull things. The llamas and the whole family, they were not well fit, neither to be ridden or to pull things. So it's all by men were running literally from Cusco to Quito. And when you know that Cusco is at over 12,000 feet of altitude, they developed very special lungs for that. Under the Inca, the city was divided in 4 sections. And you can see that the lower section here, and then the higher section, and each of them are separated in 2 that represent the 4 provinces of the Inca Empire. And each of these sections had its own road leaving from there and leading to their empire, to their province. And the leader had to have a house in their quarter where they would stay sometimes when they were around before going back to their province. When an Inca died, his title went to one son that he would typically nominate, and his property was given to a corporation controlled by his other relatives so that they could take care of his mummy, because they were mummified. And so that was very important. The mummies of all the Incas were located in the Coricancha, the temple of the sun. And the family had to take care of it, make sure it was always in good condition, and sometimes move it to the grand square when there were special ceremonies. The mummies would appear for population to see, to make sure that the lineage was there. And really very important. As you might be aware, the constructions by the Incas were incredible. They were doing it by the ashlar method, so no cement in between or mortar, but the stones were cut to impeccably fit one another. And this in a country that is in the middle of the earthquake region, it's incredibly, you have earthquake all the time, was very important, because then the stones move, but they have enough place if you want to move without breaking. And so this type of construction survived extremely well the earthquakes. And it's interesting and ironic that the Spaniards, when they built their house, when there was a big earthquake, their house would fall apart, but the Incas' constructions would remain. So the 19 months after the capture of Atahualpa, the Spaniards explorer came to Cusco in May 1533 and gained control because of the arms and their horses and employing a very different military strategy. They were able to submit the Incas very quickly. And then a little later in November, Francisco Pizarro officially arrived in Cuzco. Now the capital, I want to read a little text written by the Spaniards so that you have an idea on how they saw. The capital of the Inca astonished the Spaniards by the beauty of its edifices, the length and regularity of its streets. The great square was surrounded by several palaces, since each sovereign built a new palace for himself. The delicacy of the stonework excelled that of the Spaniards. The fortress had 3 parapets, and we'll see it, and was composed of heavy masses of rock. Through the heart of the capital ran a river faced with stone. The most sumptuous edifice in Cuzco was undoubtedly the great temple dedicated to the sun, studded with gold plates, surrounded by convents and dormitories for the priests. The palaces were numerous, and the troops lost no time in plundering them of their content, as despoiling the religious edifices, including the royal mummies in the Coricancha. So that gives you an idea that gold was everywhere. And of course, that was very tempting. So here's a view of, why does it work? Okay, here's a view of Cuzco, seen from Sacsayhuamán, the fortress. And another view that plunges on the main square. And that main square was at that time the grand square used by the Incas for their ceremonies for bringing people in. The Spaniards reused it and built their cathedral, as well as the Jesuits built their own church on the same square. That shows you the power immediately that, oh, this is very symbolic. We have to realize it's not an accident. It doesn't happen just like that. And so this is the square. And interestingly enough, the Spaniards made it smaller because they didn't want to emphasize too much the greatness of the Incas. So this is where everything was happening, and we'll see it later. But you can see it's a grandiose scenery. And here's the Coricancha. That was what you see as the base, is very typical of the construction by the Incas. This is done without mortar. So the stones are really cut and adapted to one another. What you see, very huge stones, not even as big as what you will see later on in Sacsayhuamán. That was the Temple of the Sun, Coricancha, with a platform. So that was the platform, and on top was the temple with a large room that you can see reconstructed here, and where mummies would be displayed, the mummies of the different Incas. This was entirely lined with gold. And the outdoor, what you see here, would have been studded with gold too, but so intelligently that they would put the lesser quality gold facing north, so that, no, sorry, facing south, because the sun shines the other way over there. So the south, because it wasn't have the sun shining into it, but the high quality gold was where the sun would shine into it and really make it even look more incredible. Very quickly, the Spaniards knew that the first thing they had to do is go and do what they call substitution and replace all the temples by churches and all the small places of prayers and so on, replace them by crosses and other Christian symbols. And this is, in fact, you can see still the base of Coricancha with the Dominican monastery on top of it. That monastery was built very quickly, but then there was a very large earthquake in 1650 that gave it severe damage, and it was reconstructed in 1680. It's a pretty place, but you still imagine the Temple of the Sun before. The other great place is Sacsayhuamán, which is a fortress that is really looking over Cuzco. It's higher than Cuzco. Cuzco is at 3,600 meters, multiplied by 3 to have the in yard. And but Sacsayhuaman is at 4,000, so it's 12,000 feet altitude. So when you arrive in Cuzco, you are told to sleep for 3 or 4 hours so that your body can adapt to the lack of oxygen. I remember taking a taxi and going to Sacsayhuaman and literally being high. Not only physically, but emotionally, I had a high and I couldn't believe it. It's such an incredible place because look at the size of the people compared to the stones. There are stones that weigh over 300 tons. So to give you an idea, that's unbelievable. And they, yes?
No, I'm sorry, I have a question about the being feeling high.
It's the lack of oxygen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Were you fainting?
No, it's like if I had taken drugs, which I wasn't. And it was, I remember to this day, and it's 50 years ago, I remember being there, and I was almost jumping, on the same place there because it was so unbelievable. And you are there high up with a view on Cuzco and look at this incredible architecture that has been plundered. This is nothing compared to what it was when the Incas had built it. It had a palace on top, a temple on top, but they used all the smaller stones as a quarry to build their own houses in Cuzco. So a lot of the Spanish houses were built with the stones of Sacsayhuaman. They couldn't bother with the larger one because they couldn't move them. So they left them, but when you look at it, it's kind of a ruin. And here is the ashlar technique. So you see how very intimately they espouse one another, if you want, just cutting the stone so they can adapt to one another. And you have streets in Cuzco where you can really see these stones. There's one stone with 14 angles. Just unbelievable. And this is the Inti Jaime, which is that reenactment of the great procession for the sun that would take place during the Inca time, where they would have that huge procession and huge event happening at the foot of the Sacsayhuaman fortress. And every year you have that with people dressed up and they come and worship the sun.
So, Anne, how could they have cut those?
We don't know. And that's the thing they have been doing, as you can imagine, doing a lot of research as it happens if you go to Greece and you go to Peloponnesus and see Argos and Mycenae, they don't know exactly how they did and how did they transport it. The Greek knew the wheel, they didn't. So it's really very difficult. And as I said, they're huge. You stand next to it and it towers over you. It's unbelievable.
Can you see that in Machu Picchu?
Not as much as this. No, Machu Picchu, they are smaller. And they might not have access, and Machu Picchu is a much more difficult landscape, if you want, to process this. So the stones are more human sized. This is unbelievable. You have to look on the net because I couldn't bring all the pictures I wanted of but it's really worth looking at it close where you see comparison of human being and the size of the stones. Okay, I'm not only there to talk about Cuzco like this, but the school of Cuzco. And so shortly after 1534, the conquistadores founded the first artistic center that literally taught European artistic techniques in the Americas. And that was almost the first that happened there. And it was directed to indigenous population as well as mestizos, so people that were of both descent. One of the main thing is that in 1560, and that lasted to 1654 because of earthquakes and others, they constructed a huge cathedral of Cuzco, which is a very intricate building. And so they needed people to come and decorate it. They were far from everything in Cuzco. You have to realize how far away Cuzco is from everything at that time. And so we find that the influence through an Italian painter, Bernardo BT, that arrived in 1583. BT comes from Italy, but transited through Spain to come. And so he had seen the works of Zurbarán and Luis Almeida and so on, and was influenced by them. So you have the dual influence from them, plus a lot of engravings that were circulating around, coming from the Netherlands. And so you have Flemish influence too, through these engravings. So BT is not going to stay very long in Cuzco. He starts in Lima and then comes to Cuzco, and he's going to wander around. He's going to go and visit different larger cities around and teach over there. So he will be followed in 85 by Mateo Perez and Angelino Medoro. But by 1688, the Indian Quechua and Mestizos painters are going to decide to split from the teaching. It's almost like the impression is splitting from the academy, if you want, because they don't want to be told how they have to do it. And they want to use their very own style. And so they free themselves from these, the corporation. And what we find, and you will see a lot of these examples, it's a different handling of the perspective. They don't use the mathematical perspective that was used during the Renaissance. They have their own way of handling it. They fragment the, can't you open it? You can't.
I was hearing noise.
Oh, okay, sorry. They fragment the space in different concurrent spaces, and we'll see with compartmentalized scenes. They love intense colors, and you see that already when you look at the way the Indians dress. It's always bright red and yellow and green and blue. They don't like the soft colors. And so they use that in the color, and incredible use of gold, as we will see. They often, and that's where the interesting, they depict the Andean flora and fauna in the backdrop. And not only in the backdrop, we'll see, for example, in the Last Supper scene, for example, they don't use lamb, they don't know lamb. So why putting lamb in the middle of the table? They put a guinea pig, which is a delicacy in Peru. And so you have a little grilled guinea pig in the middle of the table. And so that's very typical of what you find. They also have a huge Marian cult. Mary, as we'll see, is very important because she replaces the Inca goddesses that were so important to the population. And each city is going to develop its own Marian cult. And then the very different things is their love for warrior angels. And so we'll see, hopefully I can show you all these examples. So this is an example of the painting by Bernardo BT. You can see that definitely Italian Mannerist influence with a very different use of colors, what we'll see later on with the School of Cuzco. Soft blues and pink, typical of the Mannerist period. This is a work he did for the Church of San Pedro in Lima. And notice he uses tempera. So I was wondering, tempera, as long as you have the pigments, is easy to have, you need egg. Oil is a different issue. you need the proper oil. And so I think it took them a little while before they got the oil and the ingredients to make the oil over there. So he works, he arrives in Peru in 1575, starts working in Lima. And then, as I mentioned, he is going to be very mobile, traveling all over South America. And so therefore he could never establish really a school. It's other people that took over and made it a school. But his influence is huge because he did travel a lot. And here's another work, and here you can feel some Spanish influence in the position with his Immaculate Conception, which is in the Iglesia de la Merced in Cuzco. Oh, sorry, didn't move that one. No, I mentioned the fact that there is some similar beliefs between the Incas and the Christianity, which is really going to facilitate the task of the Spaniards. They believe in the supreme creator God, Viracocha, for the Incas. God, as we know, was the immortality of the soul. That's why they believe in that the body has to remain intact so that they can proceed to the next step. They have great reverence for sacred images. They also believe in reward or punishment after death. There is a great respect for the temples, and they love ceremonial processions, which is the display of their belief and a moment of joy. If you've ever participated to any procession in Spain, for example, or other countries, you will see that it's very joyous. You have good food around it and sometimes drinks and whatever. It finishes in the church, and then everybody goes out and has a good meal. So this is really interesting. And this is how the Spaniards are going to manipulate the indigenous population to transferring pretty quickly to the new religion, Christianity. A few main figures among these painters, and we'll talk about them, at least show some of their work. This is Diego Quispeto, who is going to work extensively, and particularly in this little church in Cusco, which correspond to the place where he lived, where he was from. He was from the district of San Sebastian. And this was the San Sebastian Church. Unfortunately, in 2016, it almost burned down. And there are an enormous amount of paintings by him in that church, and many were unfortunately completely destroyed. The others are in the process of being restored. And these were large. I mean, these were lunettes that were very large. Every single space in that church used to be filled with paintings by Diego Quispeto, who made works for other places too. And I give you some examples to show you, and he was definitely an indigenous painter. Here is a painting by him, and you can admire how proficient he was in his skill. Showing this is part of a series of the zodiac, the signs of the zodiac. This is Pisces, and of course translated into very religious paintings, showing Jesus, of course, and the scene with Peter at the time of the fishing, when Peter had some problems. The other big name is Basilio Santa Cruz Pumacayo or Callao, depending on, there are different ways of identifying his name. He's also an indigenous person, and Pumacayo is a Quechua surname. So we know at first he was thought to be a mestizos, but now they know that he's an indigenous painter. And the two, Diego and him, are really considered the master of that thing. And they are going to be they considered the paintings we're going to see, that series of very large paintings we'll see in a minute, are attributed to two of them with lots of assistants, because these were very large paintings. So he did artwork in the Cathedral of Cuzco, and then in many other places. And in the Chapel of St. Joseph, he worked in the Convento of San Francisco, also in Cuzco. So there are works of his everywhere. The first paintings I want to show you, and that I frankly didn't know at all, is a series of 19 paintings, huge paintings, that are related to the procession of Corpus Christi that happened once a year in Cusco, and is the biggest procession that they still do nowadays, which is quite interesting, but had a very important role. And these paintings, as we'll see, there are 16 paintings that are kept in the Museum of Religious Art of the Archbishopric of Cusco, that were originally in the Church of Santa Ana. That is really at the entrance of Cusco. And then 3 of them are in Chile in a private collection. And I don't know how they can do private collection, because they're really large. The problem I've had with these paintings is that they are in that museum, and it looks like nobody ever took a picture of them in the museum. So I can't even judge how large they are, but I know they're large, and different formats, depending. So all you see is unfortunately not the quality I normally show, but and also I have no idea if these are details or if it's part of a whole painting. So you'll have to just believe me and follow me on these things. Just, and they worked on, as I say, by these 2 painters that probably designed them and did the main things, but had a lot of assistants to do these paintings. They're extremely interesting for art historians or anthropologists or historians in general, because they show an aspect of life over there and show the variety of people that were in these processions, give us an idea of what was happening in the 17th century in Cusco, Peru. Now, what is the Corpus Christi procession? Corpus Christi is a concept that came kind of late in Christianity. And it all goes back to a Belgian nun, which I was very surprised to hear. But her name is Juliana of Liège, who was a nun working for people, sick people, and so on. And as often it happened at that time, she had a dream, and the dream it was a recurrent dream. For 20 years, she dreamt of a bright discus that had a big black scar. And she would dream of it again and again and again. And after 20 years, suddenly Christ appeared to her during one of her dreams. And he told her that black scar that you see on the discus itself is Christianity. But the black scar is the fact that I have no celebration of my body. And so we have to create a day that will be a celebration of my body, the body of Christ, Corpus Christi. And so the nun, as they would do, would go to her superior, told her of her dream. The superior ran to the bishop, and the bishop had the thing sent to the Pope. And they said, Christ has sent a message. We need to have a celebration day for his name. And very quickly, it became first local. It became very quickly something larger. And then the Pope decided in August of 1264, Urban IV, who was actually from Northern Europe, this instituted the Feast of Corpus Christi for the Universal Church. And now it was not a choice. It became something they had to do. And so every year there was in all Catholic places that huge procession about Corpus Christi. And so this is a Belgian nun who was responsible for that, the whole beginning of the story. And so it's still, you can see here, the celebration in Spain once a year, and it's during, in many places, in Cordoba and others, it's connected with the feria, the big feast days in Spain, where not only you have the procession with the monstrance and all the saints' statues carried on the shoulders, but also you have the ladies dressed in their particular costume for the location on a horse, and they are just processing with all the religious people. And it's an enormous feast day. So you can see here, one of the monstrances. Actually, it's a kind of a tabernacle with the monstrance in the middle. The monstrance is that particular vessel in which the consecrated host is set. And it's shown after the consecration, it goes back onto the altar, and is there to be revered by the believers. And these monstrance are typically very beautiful, as you can see, often shown just like a radiating sun with the host in the middle that you can see. But some are huge, depending on how much. And it is known that when the first gold arrived in Spain, the first gold was transformed into a monstrance and in a cross. So that was the way that the first gold arrived in Spain. But as you can see, they built some temporary triumphal arches, and that they are statues of giants that's mixed with the crowd, and a whole series. You have people dancing, you have dragons that are fighting the crowd. They are trying to prevent Christ to come through, and that are beaten, of course, as you can imagine. Moors and Turks that are there to try to prevent the success of Christ. And so all that is very symbolic, but is reaffirming the importance of Christ. Now, within the context, you have to realize of what was happening at first, it's just confirming that whole idea of, and I'm going to use a word you've heard me say from time to time, transubstantiation. And the transubstantiation for Catholics is the idea that the body of Christ is really within the host when it's consecrated, which is an idea that was rejected by the Protestants at the time of the Reform. So that idea was just emphasized in the idea of the Corpus Christi procession. Once the Reformation started, the continuation of these processions was very important because it was reinforcing the idea of the presence of the body of Christ in the host. And once it moved to Cuzco, as we will see, it also shows on top of these first two layers, the idea that they have submitted people, the victory of Christianity over the barbarians and the indigenous population. So lots of layers of meanings. So this is a view of the procession of the Corpus Christi in Cuzco. So you can see that enormous crowd on the main square, and they are traveling with all the statues that are in, not only in the cathedral, but in all the different 14 districts in Cuzco. Each of them brings out their patron saint, and it's carried on the shoulder of very gratified people and surrounded by the crowd. And so you have all these things. It's happening in Lima and other cities too, all over the Latin America. But so to tell you how it's a massive feast. And so it's actually in the Spaniards, when they saw the Inti Jaime in Cuzco, realized how much gold they had, and they thought that they had access to the golden city, the city of gold that actually they believed was actually not far from in Arizona too. So for the Corpus Christi procession, you have to see it as the presence of Christ and a very festive form. They were temporary triumphal arches that were reproduced from what was happening in Spain. They had canopies to cover the sacred statues or important people, such as the bishop if he was there, princess if he was there, the baldacchino, that always covers people, special people or special objects. They would be elevated on litter or on carts, as we'll see. They would display banners and tapestries at the windows, as we'll see on many of the paintings. There would be gun and flag salutes, fireworks, music, dances, local dances by the Incas. And then there would be battles between angels and demons, and you had dragons and all kinds of things. And then Christians dressed as Moors and Turks were trying unsuccessfully to impede the procession. So let's look at some of them. As I mentioned, these paintings are attributed to Pumacayo and Diego Quispeto and others, a whole series of assistants. The very first of the series shows actually a Last Supper and is also in the museum there. And so you have the Last Supper, which is a display in front of all the indigenous population. If you see the people at the bottom there are all Incas or mestizos. You have lots of flowers that play, and then you have the angels, and you have different saints and other important people that are displayed there. And then what you see is all the religious orders are going to process with their patron saint, or some temporary altars. In this case, it's a temporary altar that is carried on by people, and then you have different statues of angels and so on around it. And here you have a Spanish nobleman dressed with his best fineries. And they're going through, as you can see, the temporary arch. Also interesting is if you look at the figures here, they're inspired by Bruegel. These were engravings of Bruegel's works that were circulating, and they're inspired by Bruegel. On the left, the Confraternity of Saint Sebastian, and you see the statue of Saint Sebastian on the float, on the card, and Saint John the Baptist and Peter, John the Baptist here and Peter on the other side, all carried on by some indigenous people, you can see that. And again, going through temporary triumphal arches. Now, the figure that is really interesting, and we'll see him in more detail, is the cacique that you see there on the very left. And the caciques were chieftain. They were high in the hierarchy of the indigenous population and often descendants of Incas. And as you can see, he's dressed in the fineries of what the Inca people would have been dressed. And as much as it was for European royalties and so on, the same thing with the Incas. The beauty of their costume was part of to show their status in the hierarchy of their population. And so we'll detail a little bit his works, his clothing. Now, what is interesting is they have the feeling that these cards were actually not part of the procession regularly, that these were imagined cards that they inserted in the paintings. So we have the mix of reality and of imagination and fiction, because these would have been extremely difficult for them to make over there. But we'll see in a minute that they are very similar to some that were used in Europe. So here is a detail of the painting that we just saw. And you can see how intricate that card is. And no surprise, here is a drawing showing by Jose Caudi a processional card that was used in Valencia. And they cannot believe that they would have carried that all the way from Valencia to Cuzco for it. So they probably had the print and then decided that would be a good ornamentation of their painting. But this is what they show. So you can see banners were carried by deacons. And then here we have the famous image of the cacique Indian there. So for the Incas, they looked at these floats and carts as something very familiar, because they were carrying their own statues or their own Incas on their shoulder during the Inti Raymi. And so you can see here all the banners of one of these Corpus Christi procession. But here is a reenactment of what the Inti Raymi would have been before the arrival of the Spaniards. And you can see that they would have people carried on their shoulders that in fact look very much like the saints that are carried by the religious people. Here's another view showing the confraternity of Sinros. Here's Sinros, and then La Linda. La Linda will talk a little more about her. She's the Immaculate Conception, a special statue that belonged to the cathedral in Cuzco that shows Mary dressed with fineries and a very typical shape. And again, look at the windows, you see they had all kinds of brocades and beautiful tapestries hanging there. In this one showing Saint Christopher, San Cristobal in Spanish, shows you again, you have that cart with the saints, the statue of the saint carrying Jesus on his shoulder, followed again by deacons and carrying some banners. And here we have the cacique principal, what would be cacique principal, here dressed as the Incas would have been dressed earlier. And there are a whole series of marks on his costume that really mark him as the important figure that he is. He has the mascapaicha, which is that little red fringe on his forehead that was only worn by the Super Inca normally. And he also has the tocapu, which is that kind of, it's not a collar, it's a large collar made of feathers. That was another sign of his rank. And his headdress, which measures over a foot in height, would have all of these, the symbols that were related to his, if you want, coat of arms. So he had different things in here. You see, it's the condor on the very top, but there are flowers and feathers, and sometimes even there is a little fortress in the very middle. So this is all marks of his ranks, and of course would add to his stature. We have to remember too that the Incas were not small. When you look at Indians in Peru nowadays, they are small because of centuries of hunger and disease. But the Incas, when you look at the coats that they found in the excavations and so on, were measuring easily 6 foot. Yes.
I'm interested by the use of the lace on his gown.
Yes.
Is that an?
And that is an adaptation from the priest that would have his tunic, definitely often bordered with things. So these people were privileged by the Spaniards because they were the kind of authority on the indigenous people that they could use to keep the indigenous people at bay. And so they really an important figure. So they were often showered with gifts. They were rich. They were marrying very well, and their children would marry to Spaniards nobility. And we'll see that in a minute. So as I mentioned, the fact of the costume, it's interesting, they had enough money that they had their own portrait painted by some known painters at the time. And what you see on the right is Don Marcos Siguantopa, who is Siguantopa normally, is a descendant again of the Inca, and has made that posthumous painting of his ancestor, the one on the left, Don Alonso Siguantopa. He paid for it to be made after his death. And you can see there that really interesting decoration where you see he's holding the cross on the right hand, the cross that is illuminated, as you can see there. But he, on the right, he's carrying the amaro, which was a typical object that would be only held by the Super Inca, where he had all his coat of arms, and that amaro had a lot of power. They were supposed, these amaro could heal people. They could do a whole series of things that would be frightening people. And so you have that dual image there of the man holding the cross on one side and the amaro in the other. And the amaro is surmounted, as you can see, it's like a chimera dragon on the very top that shows also his particular power. And you can see he has the pectoral with the image of the sun, Inti, the god of sun, that is going to be then, mimicked, if you want, in the monstrance. When you see the monstrance with the host, has also that shape of the sun with the rays. And so you have all these substitution and these resemblance that make it for the indigenous population rather easy to swallow what the Spaniards are coming to teach them. And you can see he has at his knees, he has faces in the same on his, at his feet, and at his shoulder, he has some other mask-like figures. Now, when they were in regular life, they could be dressed as Spaniards. And this is what you see here on the right, where he's, except for the fringe, red fringe on his forehead, and the headdress that is typical of his hierarchy, his rank in hierarchy. And here you find the amaro too that is represented, but otherwise he is just dressed as a very rich Spaniard. So just as in Europe, where the nobles would use incredibly rich clothing and would prevent the lower ranks to wear the same things as they wear. It's here, it's a marking, it's a place in the hierarchy of the Incas. So just keep on, these are Mercedarian friars. Again, you see the temporary altar and the temporary triumphal arch. And here the last of the series showing the Bishop Manuel de Molinedo ending the procession. He is under the canopy, you can feel here. So this is only for important people. He was an extremely important figure in Cuzco and appears in two of the painting. He was a great reformer, and he may have been another of the patrons for these paintings. So these were not the only one, but this is for sure the largest series that we know. In Cusco, you can see this amazing one too, of also the procession of Corpus Christi by a Cuscanian artist, showing all these, look at all these virgins just covered with gold. And then you have the images of different saints or Christ in different places. Here you have what looks like to be, no, that could be San Sebastian. There's also, I know, this is Santiago Matamoros, known, so St. James Matamoros, but would have been known in South America, by the way, as Santiago Mata Indios. So killing Indians. And then other saints and so on. So you can see just the incredibly wealth of representation. This was similar for the welcoming party when a new governor or a new viceroy was coming. And here you see the entry of the viceroy, Archbishop Morcillo, into Potosi in Bolivia. And again, that kind of, it shows you that enthusiasm where they have also temporary arches there. He's coming with a horse, which was, as we know at that time, still something rather rare. And you can see the banners at all the windows on the path of the procession. And then two small other views of showing their arrival at the cathedral in Potosi. And some probably mystery play in the middle that are just a spectacle for the viceroy. We can take 5 minutes before I go on, because I know I gave you lots of information, and then we'll move on. So if you need to go stretch your legs, there is coffee around the corner. People online, I don't know if you have questions. Let me see. You can unmute you if you want to ask me questions. And again, I'm sorry you can't see me on the thing. I have some problems with the camera.
And it's Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How are you?
Fine. And you, Mary?
Quite good. And I want to refer you to a book called Letters to a King by Gaman de Poa.
Uh-huh.
Do you know the book?
No, I don't know that one. Send me the reference if you don't mind.
What?
Send me the reference if you don't mind.
It's hard to find. It was written in 1543 to
Oh,
about
okay,
16.
okay.
He
Sorry.
sent it over. It was intended to show the King of Spain how absolutely horrible the Spaniards were treating the people.
Oh, I know.
made
That's why there was the laws of Madrid. That's why
horrible.
Yeah, that's why
Beyond-
they made the laws in 1544 to try to protect the indigenous population.
It did no good.
No, Pisarro
they-
was a horrible man. He was assassinated and I wasn't unhappy about it. And his body is in the cathedral in Cusco and I resent it.
Yeah.
He was a terrible man. And his
There was
brother there too.
There was a painting of their drawings on a wall at a hotel I was at. And I saw it and I became just captivated and searched until I found it and found the books and everything.
Yeah.
But it gives graphic detail of just how,
No,
but
I know.
unfortunately, the book got lost in a castle in Denmark and they didn't find it again until I think about 1920 or 1908. And then it was finally published in 1930.
Yeah.
But it just made me sick.
No,
Anyway.
but you know, I can tell you, we've worshipped Christopher Columbus for a long time and he wasn't much better.
Oh, I know. Have you seen the Doctrine of Discovery written in 1493 by the Catholic Church, declaring anyone who wasn't of the Christian faith not human and we can take their lands?
But that's known. I had, at the time, I had, when I went to Peru, I had a fabulous book on the history of, but it's a book that is not in print anymore. And unfortunately, I lent it to somebody and they never gave it back to me. But it's very typical. And, you know, when I was there and I mentioned to somebody, I said, you know, in fact, when you see the Indian nowadays that are small, and the lady I was talking to was obviously of Spanish origin, but living there. And I said, you know, that's obvious that it was due to hunger and disease. She was angry at me because I told her that. So it's quite interesting. Yeah, but that's, we cannot, you see, that's the problem. You cannot show this and not know the horrors that happened. Actually, not only the way they were treated, but there were enough epidemic that close to 95% of the population died.
So, and then the rest were enslaved to work in mines.
Yeah.
That was life too.
Yeah. No, actually, anyway, they very quickly prevented them to work in mines, and that's why they imported slaves, so that they would work in mines. Because as I mentioned, the Treaty of Madrid of 1544 was geared at preventing the abuse that the population was suffering. So they were very much aware of what was happening, but there were excesses from the people if they were not, and if it wasn't enforced. But in many places, including Brazil, that's why they imported African slaves to work in the mines, because the indigenous population was not allowed to normally.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Interesting, fascinating place.
Yeah,
I'd love to go back.
Absolutely. Any other questions? No? Okay, we're going to start again. And I hope Mardel is going to be back because we still have quite a bit to show. And I'm going to mute you again. So.
I don't know that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you, Sue. It's not working, so leave it again. Okay, we have to, if you could. So could you turn off the lights? Okay, so I want to go on with another large painting and quite interesting is Last Judgment. And this was a painting by Diego Quispeto, a very large painting that is in the Convento de San Francisco in Cuzco, and shows that what seems to be slightly unusual for the Last Judgment that we know in Europe, either in Italy or in Northern Europe. But in fact, it is inspired by a French engraving that was circulating there at the time. And you can see the way Diego splits his painting in three different levels, where you have Christ there with all the saints and so on, and then you have Michael in the middle, you have the purgatory here and the hell, and then the good people that are going to end up going to heaven. What is interesting is that for people that were educated at the time, as you can see, he puts all kind of writing that people could read and that explained why people were in that category, or some of the things that were mentioned by some of the actors within that Last Judgment figure. And this is part of a series of paintings that were very educational. It's just instilled the fear of God into people that had some bad ideas, you know. That's the same up in Europe or in here. Now, interestingly enough, a century later, in that adorable little church, it's about 34 miles, I think, from Cuzco, series of these churches that don't look like much from outside, and you get in and it's absolutely incredible. This is a church dedicated to St. John the Baptist in Huajo. You open the door and you are just blinded by the beauty of it and the decoration. This altar, by the way, is one of the oldest of Peru. It's a Renaissance altar. It has more than 60 sculptures and 50 paintings of the Cusqueña School of Art, in addition to silverware, altarpieces, and other movable goods. Isn't that amazing? And you would never guess that when you see the church from the outside. Look at the ceiling. But our purpose in looking at that little church is to look at one of the frescoes, because on top of the easel paintings that there are in that church, there also are some amazing frescoes, and two sets of frescoes, and one of them is the Last Judgment. And that is based on the same engraving that we saw. We don't know if he saw the painting by Diego, or if that engraving was still circulating at that time, but this is one of the last Cusqueñan painter, Tadeo Escalante, who painted this in 1802. And it's just wonderful. It has that life, you know, but naivety at the same time. It's absolutely beautiful. But I'm in love with that church. Other works, for example, in the Cathedral of Cuzco that you can see here, which is very intricate inside. You don't have a large nave just leading to the altar. They're all kind of compartments. And so I can't give you a good idea of the nave. But here is the main retablo. No, that's a retablo in the transept. I don't have one. But what I wanted to attract your attention to is the painting on the right of the Last Supper. And this is just going to illustrate very well what I was mentioning, where you see the typical setting of Christ all around and the guinea pig on his back, poor little roasted guinea pig in the middle. And you have to know that it is really, guinea pig is a delicacy in Peru, still nowadays. They tricked me in eating some. They sell them on the street when you go into, and then they said, okay, this is really good, you have to try it, but we won't tell you what it is. So I ate, and it was not guinea pig, it was the heart of a guinea pig, and that was, you know, it's a heart. So it wasn't bad, but it was bizarre when they tell you what it is. So Marcos Zapata is another of these artists that also called Marcos Zapata Inca, who was one of the last members of the Cusco school. In the cathedral also is that very large painting that this describes what happened after the earthquake of Cusco in I think it's 1650 earthquake, where they all ran out of the buildings, as you can imagine, but also started immediately a procession, and you can see the Christ on the cross here in the middle, surrounded by all the clerics. That is the protector against the temblors and against the earthquakes. And shows you again that amazing landscapes of around Cusco. And here is the statue still of Christ protector of the earthquakes. You can see the mountains all around, and then you have the apparition here of God and some of the saints. And Taitacha Temblores is so the Christ of the earthquake, Temblor. And here's the procession that is happens also once a year of the Señor de los Temblores in Machu Picchu and Cuzco, with other saints that are carried around. On the same square as so the grand square of Cusco is also the Iglesia de la Compañía de Jesús, so the Jesuit church that was almost completely destroyed during the earthquake and was rebuilt in the present shape in 1668. Their main altar with a typical retablo. But a very interesting painting, and this is the subject of what I want to talk, that shows Martin Garcia de Loyola and Beatriz Clara Coya, the marriage. It's in fact the marriage of two couples, you see here. And the two girls are descendants of the Incas and are married to nobility in this painting. And what you find is that he is a descendant of Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. And so this is a way of, if you want, for the Jesuits of taking that importance of that alliance, an alliance between the Incas and the descendant of Ignatius of Loyola. Ignatius of Loyola is quite amazing. So you see here the family of the two brides with a parrot and all dressed in very typical Inca costume. And then on the other side, you have here is the other bride, sorry. This is the other bride showing. And then you have, of course, the three IHS, typical of the name of Jesus for the Jesuits. And the image of Ignatius of Loyola between the two couples there. So again, all these portraits are absolutely full of symbolism. Now, as I mentioned, there's a particular cult of the Virgin, and there I'll send you the references, but there's a book that has been written not too long ago about the Virgin of the Andes, and I borrowed the title from the book because I think it says a lot and explains a lot where that assimilation of the Virgin Mary with Inca goddesses is so natural, if you want. And so they look at the Virgin as, you know, it's that nurturing figure. It's always that. That's why the cult of Mary became very popular in the 13th century, because they needed a figure that was more nurturing than the fearful god that was shown before. So it's associated with different female deities, such as the moon goddess, Mama Kia, the earth goddess, Pachamama, and then Mama Oclo, who is one of the original 8 Incas, and then the Coyas, who was the wife of Inca and descendant of Mama Oclo. And then you also had the Ellas, who were chosen women, a little bit like the Vestal Virgins, if you want, in Rome. They were in charge of the temple, the Sun Temple. They were to take care of the temple and of the people that were the priests and so on. And they were highly regarded by society. So you have these whole series of role models for women that seem to be congregated into the image of the Virgin. And then we'll see these different versions of the Virgin depending on the city that she comes from. So Mama Kia, for example, was considered Inti's wife and sister. So we find that similar is what we find in Egypt, whether your sister and mother or in Greek mythology. Pachamama was the earth mother, and she was a fertility goddess. Was also, she embodies the mountains, and this is really important, and causes earthquakes. And so the way that the sanctuaries were around were again replaced by crosses and statues and so on. So this is Virgin of Carmel saving souls in purgatory. This is a painting by Diego Quispeto, or his circle. But a very interesting first painting is going to explain a lot of the shapes of the Virgin that we're going to see. This Virgin May of the mountain of Potosiama, so in Potosi, Bolivia, is shown, they show the mountain, and then the Virgin's head is at the top of the mountain and the hands in the middle. But look at everything that's happening. You have horses going up, you have Incas down here, you have people all over, and then you have Jesus and God the Father who is crowning the Virgin. But that assimilation of the mountain, again, Pachamama, and the Virgin is so clear there, and also explains what we'll find regularly with these Virgins is that triangular shape. That represents the mountain, in fact. What we look only as a triangle is, and then you have, of course, the Pope down below and the King. So different kind, this is the Our Lady of Cacharcas under the baldachin. And again, a whole landscape in the back, very typical of Cuzqueño school. You have a church down below, you have little church, you have people doing all kinds of things, you have the river. So this is a fortress. She's on top of a fortress and under the baldachin. So look at all these layers of symbolism and people around her. And then the typical pearl garland that is held by flowers or bows. Pearl being for the Spaniards a symbol of purity. And she has Jesus as a little king. He has a little tiara on his head. And these again, all these, this is the representation of a sculpture, of a statue. And these original statues would have been processed in the older processions. And so for them, it was easy to paint, if you want, they paint a statue. Another interesting is Our Lady of Lake Titicaca, that highest lake in the world that is very high up at the border of Peru and Bolivia. She is actually interested, I was interested by her coif, which is very much of a nun coif when you look at it. Jesus is again represented as the king. You have the pearls and the bows. You have also the Immaculate Conception. She has the moon at her feet. So there is a conflation of different representation of the Virgin. The Immaculate Conception, the Virgin shown as the Queen of Heaven with the crown, and so on and so on. And then you have the view of the Lake Titicaca behind her. And she has the staff of the Queen. Also shown is the Virgin of the Pilgrims and Child. So she wears, in fact, the shepherd's hat, which was typically worn by the pilgrims to Santiago de Compostela. And so you have the transposition of the idea of the pilgrimage to Santiago, and the Virgin suddenly carries that hat. And so does Jesus, a little hat, and you keep on having these amazing brocade dresses with fruits and flowers and the pearls and then jeweled bows. Here it's the lilies, but in fact, it's a kind of a lily that grows in Peru. It's not the typical lily. And all you see, the flowers and so on, are very particular to that places. And of course, they were lots of pilgrimage in Peru for Inti and other gods. And so this was just assimilation of the Christian pilgrimage to the Inca one. Another just wonderful, the Virgin of the Pilgrims and Child, again, in a private collection in Monte Carlo. I'll take that one any day. It's absolutely beautiful with, she's under a canopy, as you can see, with tassels, and an extraordinary dress with the moon, but it's held almost by a cherub. Quite interesting. And then you have vessels and then candles on either side. By Diego Quispe, the Immaculate Conception, a much more Italianate type of representation, but where the radiant Mary with all the cherubs around, and you still have the crescent of the moon for the Immaculate Conception. And this was typical of statues that were presented. And here is the La Linda that we saw on the image before, which is that statue that belongs to the Cuzco Cathedral. And these were the statues, as you can see, again, you have the triangle costume that would represent the mountain, Pachamama, and the whole assimilation with the Virgin. And these, you have the crescent of the moon with the cherub, and these would be just processed through every time you had the procession, they would come out of the cathedral and be shown to the people. Our Lady of Bethlehem, this was another iconographic transfers commissioned by the Order of the Bethlehemite, that was an order founded in Guatemala. She's also called La Mamacha Belén.
And
yes,
do these triangular shaped capes appear in any other culture?
Not as it. This is very much the mountain.
Okay.
So yes, you have, because when they put if she has a coat, the way to have it so that it doesn't crumble is going to be, but in this case, it's definitely the presentation of that. Virgin of the Rosary of Pamata, this one is special because it has feathers all around the face. So instead of having the rays of the light that emanates from her, in this case, it's feathers. And this is, of course, right away, a remembrance of the Incas headdresses, where they had lots of feathers that were used as decoration. And then you have always the garlands with the pearls and the jeweled bows, or in this case, the flowers, jeweled flowers. Now, we also have another specialty, which is the angels, warriors with the arquebus, the Ángel Arcabucero. And very interesting, there are dozens and dozens of them that have been painted, shows as the warrior angel, is in this case the angel Letiel. And you see sometimes martial angels such as Michael and others that have been considered, don't forget, they're the one who sent Lucifer to hell. So they were fighters, but in Europe, they never shone with arquebus. And so it's an interesting mixture of these Christian images with some images that were coming actually from the north. And you have these engravings circulating, showing the soldiers with the arquebus. And they thought, this looks good with an angel. And so they adapted, and you now have angels with these arquebuses, and with incredible costume that are derived from the Spaniards' regalia. And you can see in different postures, but definitely supposed to be angels. And then coming from, I don't know if anybody has is familiar with the Peyton Wright Gallery in Santa Fe. They have apparently a whole collection. I haven't seen it, but they have a whole collection of the statues of these arcobuceros that unfortunately were taken from some churches, they looted literally from churches in Peru. They don't advertise him on the side, by the way. I was trying to look at them, but they don't even talk about it. So not only you have these very beautifully dressed angels, but you also sometimes have angels that are a little more frolicking. In here, you have an angel with sweet stalks, almost like dancing when you look at him, you know, on his toes. So now I'm just going to quickly show you some collections of these Cuscanian paintings. This is in the church of San Juan de Letrán in Chucuito, that has the whole collection of paintings. These are all paintings by the School of Cuzco. Same thing here. As you can see, they are large format. In the church of Calamarca, they had in Bolivia, they had a painter of Calamarca that shows you here. And then inside you have the collection of all these angels, warriors, angels. And another of these wonderful churches, the San Pedro de Huayillas, with amazing frescoes. Look at that. This the life of the rich, but that are going to end up in hell. And then you have the life of the poor that take care of one another. And these are good people. That's the frescoes. They have restored the front that unfortunately was damaged during an earthquake. But again, look at the inside of the church with an incredible collection of the Cuscanian painters on the walls. It's considered the Sistine Chapel of the Andes. So I hope I've opened your eyes to another side of the School of Cuzco. And next time, we're going to look at Aleijadinho, who is a legendary Brazilian sculptor of the 18th century. So let me stop the recording and then we can open to questions. You can put the light on if you, come on. If it doesn't want to take, sorry, I'm trying to stop the recording. Yes, okay, hold on.